The ministry's owl arrived during breakfast, which meant everyone saw it. Hermione watched the tawny bird descend through the burrow's kitchen window, its trajectory unmistakable. Her fingers tightened around her teacup. Across the table, Ron stopped mid-chew, a piece of toast halfway to his mouth. Molly's hand stilled over the washing up. Even George, who'd barely looked up from his plate in 3 weeks, raised his eyes. The letter landed beside her jam pot with a soft thud that seemed far too loud. "Well," Molly said, her voice bright in that terrible way it had been since Fred died. "That's official looking." Hermione broke the ministry seal, purple wax, Kingsley's personal stamp, and unfolded the parchment. Her eyes tracked across the formal script once, twice. The words didn't change. Junior legislative position in the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures. Immediate appointment. Your tireless advocacy. Begin 1st of June. "What is it?" Ron asked. She looked up. His expression was carefully neutral, the same face he'd worn when Harry's aura acceptance had arrived 2 days prior. Supportive, braced. "A job," she said, "at the ministry, in magical creatures." "That's wonderful, dear." Molly turned from the sink, smile fixed in place. "Though, of course, you'll finish your NEUTs first. September's not so far away." The assumption sat heavy in the air. Hermione folded the letter precisely along its creases, buying herself 3 seconds to think. She'd already written to McGonagall. The headmistress had responded within hours. "We are holding places for all students whose 7th year was disrupted by the war. You especially, Miss Granger, are expected to return. Your academic record demands completion." Expected. The word had lodged itself somewhere beneath her ribs. "It starts in June," Hermione said quietly. "They want me now." Ron set down his toast. "Right, so you'd skip." "I'd sit my NEUTs as an external candidate later, when I could take time to prepare properly." The words came out practiced because she'd been rehearsing them since the owl appeared on the horizon. The position is entry-level, but it's in legislation. I could actually write policy, not just petition for it. She thought of the House Elf Welfare Association meetings she'd attended before Hogwarts fell. Elderly witches sipping tea, nodding sympathetically, doing precisely nothing. SPEW had been a schoolgirl's project, easily dismissed. This would be different. This could matter. "But your NEWTs," Molly said, and there was something fragile in her voice now, something that made Hermione's throat tighten. "You've worked so hard, Hermione. You were going to. Everyone knows you'll score the highest marks in decades. It's what you've always wanted." Had it been? Hermione couldn't quite remember wanting anything beyond Survive Tomorrow for so long that her older ambitions felt like someone else's memories. "McGonagall expects you back," Molly continued, warming to her argument. "She said so in her letter. And your parents." She stopped abruptly. Hermione's parents, currently living in Australia, believing themselves to be Wendell and Monica Wilkins, childless and content. She'd told the Weasleys she would restore their memories after she'd rested, after things settled, after she figured out how to explain what she'd done. 3 weeks, and she still couldn't make herself book the portkey. "I think," Hermione said carefully, "that this opportunity might not come again. Kingsley is appointing people now, while he has political capital. In 6 months, the old families will have reasserted influence. The ministry might not be hiring Muggleborns for legislative work, It was true. It was also a convenient truth, the kind that could justify almost anything. Ron was watching her with that particular expression he got when he was working something out. Not stupid, never stupid, despite what he'd let people believe for years. He saw patterns differently than she did, emotional weather instead of logical structure. "Do you want to go back to Hogwarts?" he asked. The question was so direct it winded her. Did she want to sit in charms, practicing spells she'd needed to perfect under fire? Did she want to sleep in Gryffindor Tower, where Lavender's bed would be empty? Did she want to walk corridors where she'd fought for her life, where Fred and Tonks and Remus had died, where Colin Creevey had fallen still clutching his camera? Did she want to be a student again, raising her hand for permission to speak? "I don't know," she whispered. George stood abruptly. His chair scraped against flagstone, harsh and sudden. Everyone froze. "She should take the job," he said. His voice was flat, unused. He hadn't strung together more than 5 words at a time since the funeral. "War's over. People should do what matters." He left his plate on the table and walked out. They heard his footsteps on the stairs, uneven and tired. The door to his room, to the room he'd shared with Fred, closed with a soft click. Molly's face crumpled. She pressed a hand to her mouth, turned back to the washing up with sudden violent focus. Dishes clattered. Ron reached across the table. His fingers brushed Hermione's wrist. A question without words. She wanted to take his hand. She wanted to run upstairs and pack her bag and disapparate to the ministry this instant, before anyone could tell her all the reasons she shouldn't. She wanted to fix George's grief and Molly's fear and the great gaping absence where Fred had been. She wanted to stop wanting anything at all. "I need to think," she said instead. She took the letter and went outside. The garden was overgrown. Molly hadn't had the energy for it, and no one else had the heart to touch the plants she'd always tended. Hermione sat on the bench near the pond where they'd practiced Patronuses a lifetime ago, when the biggest threat had been Umbridge's educational decrees. The letter sat in her lap, growing slightly damp from the morning mist. She could see both futures with uncomfortable clarity. Return to Hogwarts. Sit her NEWTs in October. Score outstanding in every subject, because anything less would feel like losing. Finish 7th year properly, the way Hermione Granger was supposed to finish things. Make her parents proud when she finally restored their memories and could tell them their daughter had completed her education despite everything. Accept the ministry. Start immediately in a position with real legislative power, however junior. Work on laws that could change lives. House elves, werewolves, part humans who'd been scapegoated and persecuted for centuries. Do something that mattered while the political moment allowed it. Risk everything she'd built her identity around for something she'd only just realized she wanted more. The rational choice was obvious. NEWTs were permanent, irreplaceable. The ministry would have other positions, other opportunities. McGonagall was right. Her academic record demanded completion. But Hermione had spent a year living in a tent, hunting Horcruxes, watching people die for a future they'd never see. She'd used every spell she knew to stay alive, and not once had anyone asked to see her examination scores. What did permanent mean anymore? Footsteps approached through wet grass. Ron sat down beside her, careful to leave space between them. He was good at that. knowing when to be close and when closeness would feel like pressure. "Mum's crying," he said conversationally, over the dishes, pretending she's not. "I know. She thinks if everyone just goes back to normal, it'll stop hurting." Hermione looked at him. His profile was set against the grey morning sky, jaw tight. He'd lost weight during the war and hadn't gained it back. None of them had. "And you?" she asked. "What do you think?" Ron was quiet for a long moment. A robin landed near the pond, pecked at the mud, flew away. "I think normal's gone," he said finally. "I think we're all just pretending we know what comes next." It was the most honest thing anyone had said in 3 weeks. "Harry's starting Aura training in July," Hermione said. It wasn't quite a non sequitur. "Yeah. Everyone expects you to join him." Ron's laugh was brief and bitter. "Yeah. But you've been spending every morning at the shop with George." "Someone has to." His hands curled into fists on his knees, relaxed deliberately. He can't do it alone. Not yet. Maybe not ever." "What do you want?" Hermione asked. The question seemed to surprise him. He turned to look at her properly, and she saw the exhaustion etched around his eyes. The weight he'd been carrying while everyone assumed Harry Potter's best friend knew exactly where he belonged. "I want Fred not to be dead," Ron said. "I want to sleep without nightmares. I want Mum to stop pretending. Everything's fine, and George to say more than 3 words a day, and you to—" He stopped. "Me to what?" "To choose what makes you happy," he said quietly. "Not what makes everyone else comfortable." Hermione felt something crack open in her chest, painful and necessary. "What if I don't know the difference anymore?" Ron reached over and took her hand. His palm was warm, calloused, familiar. "Then you pick something and find out." They sat together in the garden while the mist slowly burned away. Hermione thought about McGonagall's expectations and her mother's imagined disappointment and the version of herself who'd cared so desperately about being the brightest witch of her age. She thought about house elves serving at the victory feast, unnoticed and unthanked. She thought about Creature, whose loyalty they'd earned too late. She thought about all the people who'd fought and died and survived, and how many of them would return to laws that said they were less than human. She thought about the girl who'd started SPEW in 4th year, righteous and naive, and so certain that facts and logic could change minds. That girl had been exhausting. She'd also been right. "If I take the ministry position," Hermione said slowly, "McGonagall will be disappointed." "Probably." "Your mother will worry I'm making a mistake." "Definitely. I'll be the only person in my year who didn't finish properly." Ron squeezed her hand. "You'll be the only person in your year who's rewriting laws while everyone else is revising for transfiguration." It wasn't comfort. It was perspective. Hermione looked down at Kingsley's letter, at the official seal and formal language, and the opportunity hidden inside bureaucratic prose. She thought about spending another year at Hogwarts, safe and structured, and slowly suffocating under the weight of everyone's expectations. She thought about choosing something different. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "Good," Ron said. "Means it matters." She wrote 3 letters that afternoon. The first, to McGonagall, was the hardest. Hermione drafted it 4 times before she managed something that didn't sound defensive or apologetic, or like she was asking permission she didn't need. "Dear Professor McGonagall, I am deeply grateful for the place you have held for me at Hogwarts. Your faith in my academic abilities has meant more than I can properly express. However, I have accepted a position with the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures, beginning 1st of June. I believe this opportunity to contribute to legislative reform is one I cannot defer. I intend to sit my NEWTs as an external candidate when circumstances allow. I hope you will understand that this decision, while difficult, reflects my commitment to the values Hogwarts taught me, that we must stand up for those who cannot stand up for themselves. With respect and gratitude, Hermione Granger. The second letter to Kingsley was shorter. Acceptance, gratitude, a request for reading materials so she could prepare properly. The third letter she hesitated over. Her parents didn't know they had a daughter. They wouldn't recognize her name or understand why a British teenager was writing to them. But she wrote it anyway, just 3 lines she'd send when, if, she restored their memories. I made a choice today that you taught me to make. I chose the work that mattered over the achievement that looked impressive. I hope that when you remember me, you'll be proud. She didn't send that one, but she kept it. At dinner, Molly was silent. George didn't come down. Harry, who'd returned from a meeting with Aura recruiters, congratulated her with careful enthusiasm. Ron caught her eye across the table and smiled, small and private and real. Later, when everyone else had gone to bed, Hermione sat in the garden again. The stars were out, brilliant and indifferent. Somewhere in Australia, her parents were sleeping, content in their false lives. Somewhere in the ministry, her desk was waiting. She felt the future stretching ahead of her, unmapped and enormous. She felt terrified. She felt, for the first time in months, like she might actually be alive. The choice was made. Tomorrow, she'd begin learning to live with it. Ron stood in the back room of Weasley's Wizard Wheezes, holding a box of extendable ears that had been sitting on the same shelf since April. The label was in Fred's handwriting. He'd been staring at it for 3 minutes now, which George had definitely noticed, but was pretending he hadn't. His brother worked at the main counter with mechanical precision, measuring pygmy puff food, restocking skiving snack boxes, checking inventory with none of the theatrical flair that had once made every transaction feel like performance art. The shop was open. Customers came. George served them. The register balanced at day's end. It was like watching someone go through the motions of being alive. Ron set the box down carefully and moved to help a kid who was eyeing the Peruvian instant darkness powder with the kind of intent that meant he was absolutely going to use it on a sibling. Normally, Fred would have encouraged this, would have leaned in conspiratorially, suggested the decoy detonators as a combo purchase, made the kid feel like he was joining a grand tradition of mayhem. Ron just rang up the powder and made change. The kid left looking vaguely disappointed. "You're terrible at this," George said, without looking up from his inventory sheet. "Yeah, well." Ron moved back to the storeroom, started unpacking a shipment of nosebleed nougat ingredients. "Not exactly my calling. Could have fooled me. You've been here every morning for 2 months." Ron's hand stilled on a jar of dried billywig wings. "You need help. I need a business partner." George's voice was flat. "Got a dead one of those." The words hung in the air, brutal and true. Ron had learned not to flinch at them. George said these things sometimes, casual observations delivered like he was commenting on the weather. The first few times, Ron had tried to comfort him, had said the wrong things in the wrong ways until George had looked at him with something like pity and told him to stop. Now Ron just listened. "Mum wants to know if you're coming to dinner," Ron said instead. "No." "She's making shepherd's pie." Still no. Ron finished unpacking the shipment in silence. Through the doorway, he could see the shop's bright chaos. Pygmy puffs in their display, fanged frisbees hovering in formation, a whole wall of love potions that nobody had the heart to reorganize. Fred had arranged that display, had color-coded it by intensity, labels written in his slanting script with commentary that ranged from cheeky to outright obscene. Cupid crystals, for when subtlety is for Hufflepuffs. George caught him looking. "You've got that meeting with Robards today." Not a question. George tracked Ron's schedule the way he tracked inventory, noting patterns without commenting on them. "Yeah," Ron said. 4 o'clock. Gawain Robards was head of the Aura office. He'd sent Ron 3 letters over the past month, each more pointed than the last. The ministry wanted war heroes in robes. Harry had already started training. They were holding a place for Ron Weasley, chess master, battle tactician, the boy who'd helped destroy Voldemort. They were expecting him. Everyone was expecting him. "You going to accept?" George asked. Ron looked at his brother, at the careful way he held himself, like something might break if he relaxed. George had always been the loud one, the twin who did the voices and pushed boundaries just to see what would happen. Now he moved through the world like he was trying not to disturb it. "Don't know," Ron said. "Liar." The accusation was mild, almost affectionate. George could still read him, even gutted by grief. Ron exhaled. "Harry's already started. Mum's been going on about it, since his acceptance came through. About how it's important work, real work, how I'd be good at it." "You would be." "Yeah, but you don't want to." It wasn't quite that simple. Ron had spent months hunting Horcruxes, fighting Death Eaters, watching people die for a cause that should have ended decades ago. He'd been good at the fighting, better than he'd expected. Strategy came naturally when the stakes were survival. He could do aura work, could probably excel at it, could spend the rest of his life chasing dark wizards while George sat alone in a joke shop, pretending half of himself wasn't missing. "I want—" Ron stopped, started over. "Fred would have hated you doing this alone." George's hands went very still on the inventory parchment. When he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. "Fred's not here to have opinions about it." "No, he's not." Ron moved to stand in the doorway, where he could see both his brother and the shop beyond. "But I am, and I'm allowed to have opinions about watching you work yourself into the ground, because you can't stand going home to a bedroom that's too quiet." The silence stretched thin and dangerous. Then George laughed, sharp and humorless. "Bloody hell, Ron. When did you get perceptive?" "Somewhere between the Horcruxes and the funeral." George set down his quill, looked at Ron properly for the first time all morning. "Mum tell you to say this?" "Mum doesn't know I'm thinking about it." "About what? Turning down aura training to sell fanged frisbees?" "About splitting time," Ron said. "Mornings here, evenings at training." Robards said the program's flexible for the first year. They're still designing it around Harry anyway. It was true. The Aura office was being rebuilt from scratch. Half the old guard had been Death Eaters or sympathizers. The other half was dead or traumatized into retirement. They needed new blood, and they needed it trained fast. Harry had negotiated a modified schedule that let him skip some of the traditional requirements. Ron could probably do the same. Probably. George was watching him with an expression Ron couldn't quite read. "You do that? Split yourself in half?" "Yeah." "Why?" Because George flinched every time the shop bell rang in a pattern that sounded like Fred's arrival. Because their mother cried into the washing up, and their father worked late to avoid the dinner table's empty chair. Because Hermione had chosen her own path instead of the expected one, and watching her do it had felt like permission. Because Ron was tired of being the supporting character in other people's stories. "Because I want to," Ron said simply. George studied him for a long moment. Then he picked up his quill again, made a notation on his inventory sheet. "You're an idiot." "Probably." "Aura training's brutal. You'll be exhausted." "Definitely. And you'll still be terrible at sales." "Without question." George's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but the ghost of one. "Fine, but if you're doing this, you're doing it properly. I'm not having you fall asleep during inventory because you were up all night practicing shield charms." "Deal." "And you're learning the register system. The actual system, not whatever approximation you've been fumbling through." "That's fair." "And," George's voice caught, just slightly. He cleared his throat. "And you're taking Wednesdays off? Completely off. No shop, no training. You and Hermione do something normal. Something that's not about the war or rebuilding or any of this." Ron felt something tight in his chest loosen fractionally. "Yeah. Yeah." George returned to his inventory with deliberate focus. Someone in this family should remember how to be happy. Might as well be you. The meeting with Robards was in the ministry's temporary Aura office. Most of the original headquarters had been destroyed during the battle. Ron arrived 10 minutes early and spent them staring at recruitment posters that featured wizards who looked nothing like the exhausted, traumatized fighters he'd actually known. Defend the future. Become an Aura. The future. As if they all agreed on what that looked like. Weasley. Robards emerged from an inner office, grizzled and compact. He'd fought at Hogwarts, had personally dueled Dolohov while missing half his left arm. "Good. Come in." The office was sparse. A desk, 2 chairs, filing cabinets that were probably empty. Robards sat and gestured for Ron to do the same. "I'll be direct," Robards said. "We want you. Potter vouches for you, which counts. More than that, I've read the reports from the Horcrux hunt. You think tactically. You keep your head under pressure. You're exactly what we need." Ron had prepared for this, had practiced responses that sounded grateful and committed and appropriate. "I want to do it," he said instead, "but I need a modified schedule." Robards' eyebrows rose. "Potter already negotiated flexibility. We've established precedent. Not for training, for mornings. I need mornings free." "Free for what?" Ron met his gaze steadily. "Family business." Understanding flickered across Robards' face. He'd been at the funeral, had probably known Fred, at least by reputation. Everyone in law enforcement knew about the twins who'd turned Umbridge's reign into a circus. "The joke shop," Robards said. "Yes, sir." "You want to split time between Aura training and retail." Put like that, it sounded absurd. Ron resisted the urge to defend himself, to explain about George's grief and family obligation and how he couldn't just abandon his brother to drown in silence and inventory. Yes, sir, he repeated. Robards leaned back in his chair, assessing. You understand what you're asking. Aura training is intensive. 3 years minimum, even accelerated. You'll be studying while your peers are sleeping. You'll miss social events, family dinners, probably every Quidditch match for the foreseeable future. I know. And you'll still be expected to perform at the same level as trainees who aren't dividing their focus. I understand. Do you? Robards' voice sharpened. Because I've seen this before, Weasley. Young wizards who think they can do everything, be everything. They burn out or wash out, and we waste resources training them. Ron thought about the Horcrux hunt, about months of tension and hunger, and Ron's own jealousy poisoning everything until he'd abandoned his best friends in the middle of a forest. About coming back, earning forgiveness he hadn't deserved, learning that being brave didn't mean being fearless. It meant choosing to stay when leaving would be easier. I'm not trying to do everything, Ron said quietly. I'm trying to do 2 things that matter. If I can't handle both, I'll tell you, but I'd like the chance to try. Robards was silent for a long moment. Then he pulled out a scroll, unrolled it with a flick of his wand. Modified schedule, he said. Training sessions, from 2 p.m. to 8 p.m., 4 days a week. Independent study the rest. You'll take the same examinations as standard trainees at the same intervals. Miss 2 in a row, you are out. Understand? Relief and terror hit simultaneously. Yes, sir. And Weasley? Robards looked up from the scroll. I'm not doing this because I'm sentimental about family businesses. I'm doing it because someone who knows what they're willing to sacrifice usually knows what they're fighting for. Don't make me regret it. No, sir. Ron signed the scroll. The ink gleamed silver for a moment. A binding magical contract. He was an Aura trainee now, officially. He was also still George's business partner, brother, the person who'd show up every morning no matter how exhausted he was. He was splitting himself in half, and everyone would tell him it was a mistake. He left the ministry, feeling more certain than he had in months. He found Hermione in the Burrow's garden, reading case files in the fading August light. She'd been at the ministry for 2 months now, and the work was already changing her, sharpening her focus, settling something restless that had driven her since the war ended. She looked up when he approached, marked her place with one finger. How did it go? Ron sat beside her on the bench. I'm starting next week. Modified schedule, afternoons and evenings. Her expression shifted through surprise, calculation, understanding. So you can keep working mornings at the shop? Yeah. What did Robards say? That I'm an idiot who's going to burn out within 6 months. Ron grinned without humor. Didn't say he was wrong. Hermione set down her files. What did George say? That I'm an idiot who needs to take Wednesdays off. He's not wrong either. They sat in comfortable silence. A moth fluttered past, drawn to the light spilling from the kitchen window. Inside, Ron could hear his mother moving around, preparing dinner for people who might not come. Everyone thinks I'm making a mistake, Ronnie said. Are you? He considered it, thought about exhaustion and impossible schedules and the likelihood he'd disappoint someone, George or Robards, or Harry or himself. Thought about Fred's handwriting on product labels and George's mechanical efficiency and the way his brother had looked when he'd said someone in this family should remember how to be happy. Probably Ron admitted. But it's my mistake to make. Hermione reached over and took his hand. Her fingers were ink-stained, grip strong. Good. They sat together as the light faded, both of them holding on to choices that terrified them, both of them choosing anyway. Tomorrow, Ron would start learning how to live split in half. Tonight, he just sat with the girl he loved and pretended peace was something they might eventually learn to carry. The dress robes felt like a costume. Hermione stood in front of the mirror in her ministry office, adjusting emerald fabric that cost more than she'd ever spent on clothing in her life. The robes had been a gift from Kingsley. Not a bribe, Miss Granger, but the gala has certain expectations. And they fit perfectly, which somehow made it worse. She looked important, polished, like someone who belonged at a ministry fundraiser celebrating a new era of magical cooperation. She looked nothing like herself. "You're scowling at your reflection," said a voice from the doorway. "That's either very philosophical or very vain." Hermione turned. Percy stood there in midnight blue robes, looking every inch the ministry professional he'd always wanted to be. The war had aged him. There were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before, a carefulness to the way he held himself. "I'm questioning my life choices," Hermione said. "Excellent. That means you're ready for ministry politics." Percy stepped into the office, closing the door behind him. "You've prepared the speech." The speech. Hermione's eyes flicked to her desk, where 17 drafts sat in an increasingly agitated pile. She'd been working on it for 3 days. "Yes," she said. "May I see it?" She handed him the latest version, watched his face as he read, tracking the small movements that meant he was editing in his head. "It's very honest," Percy said finally. "That's bad. That's suicide." He set the parchment down carefully. "Hermione, you're being asked to celebrate progress in creature rights at an event attended by people who fought to keep werewolves from owning property. This speech," he tapped the parchment, "this speech calls them hypocrites in everything but name. They are hypocrites. They're also your colleagues, your supervisors, the people who control whether your legislative proposals ever see the light of day." Percy's voice was patient, the tone of someone explaining obvious facts to a bright but naive student. "I understand your frustration, truly, but you've been here 4 months. You don't have the political capital to spend on moral grandstanding." Moral grandstanding. The phrase sat heavy in the room. Hermione thought about the past 4 months, the excitement of her first week, walking into the department with her head full of reforms and changes, and the naive belief that facts would be enough, the slow, grinding reality of what came after. Every proposal she'd submitted had been considered, which meant read, nodded at, and quietly shelved. Her suggestion to grant house elves minimum wage protections, under review. Her research on werewolf employment discrimination, being studied by a committee. Her proposal for basic legal representation for accused part humans, lost in interdepartmental communications. Meanwhile, she'd been assigned to draft memos, organize filing systems, and smile at purebloods who called her dear and complimented her on her ambition as if it were a personality quirk rather than a professional qualification. She'd been patient. She'd been strategic. She told herself that change took time, that she needed to build relationships before pushing too hard. And then, 2 weeks ago, she discovered the truth. A house elf had told her, not directly, They weren't allowed to speak against their employers. But Winky, who worked in the department head's office, had left certain documents where Hermione would find them. Budget allocations, hiring freezes, a memo from the Wizengamot liaison explaining that werewolf protection laws were politically unfeasible given current public sentiment. The Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures was a performance, a progressive veneer over the same old prejudices, designed to make reformers feel heard while changing absolutely nothing. Hermione had spent 4 months being part of that performance. "What would you do?" she asked Percy. "If you were me." He considered the question seriously, which she appreciated. Percy had made his own mistakes during the war, had chosen ministry loyalty over family, had nearly lost everything before realizing what mattered. He'd earned the right to give advice. "I would give a different speech," he said. "One that praises the progress we've made, acknowledges challenges ahead, and gently suggests that continued improvement requires ongoing commitment. I would make the powerful people in that room feel good about themselves. And then I would use the social capital from that performance to push one small, achievable reform through in the next quarter." One reform. One real change is better than 17 beautiful proposals that die in committee. He wasn't wrong. Hermione knew he wasn't wrong. She'd read enough history to understand how progress actually happened, incrementally, frustratingly, through compromise and patience, and playing games she'd always despised. She could give the speech Percy wanted, could smile and praise and perform gratitude for scraps, could spend the next year, the next 5 years, the next decade, slowly pushing the ministry toward basic decency, could become the kind of person who measured success in memo revisions and committee appointments. "What if I can't?" Hermione said quietly. Percy's expression softened. "Can't what? Be patient? Can't pretend." She gestured at the speech, at her dress robes, at the office with its ministry seal and official letterhead. "Can't stand in front of people who think house elves are property and werewolves are monsters and tell them they're doing a wonderful job of being slightly less terrible than their parents. Then you'll have a very short career in government," Percy said, "and you'll accomplish nothing." The words hit like a slap. Percy's face showed he knew it, but he didn't take them back. Hermione sat down at her desk, careful not to wrinkle her robes. Through her office window, she could see the atrium being decorated for tonight's gala. Floating candles, conjured flowers, a string quartet practicing in the corner. Beautiful and expensive and designed to celebrate people who'd done the bare minimum of not actively supporting Voldemort. "Tell me about your first year at the ministry," she said. "Before the war, when you started in international magical cooperation." Percy hesitated, thrown by the shift. "What about it? Did you compromise? Did you give speeches you didn't believe in?" "Of course. Did it work? Did you change anything?" Percy was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know," he admitted. "I was so focused on advancement, on proving myself, that I'm not sure I ever tried to change anything. I just wanted to be important. And now I know the difference between being important and mattering." He met her eyes. "Hermione, I'm not telling you to give up your principles. I'm telling you to be strategic about them. You're brilliant and passionate and absolutely right about everything you're fighting for. But if you burn bridges tonight, you'll be replaced by someone who doesn't care at all." It was a good argument. Rational, pragmatic, exactly what a smart person would do. Hermione thought about SPEW badges and the house elves in the Hogwarts kitchens who'd thrown her hats back at her, thought about being 14 and so certain that logic would win, that if she just explained clearly enough, everyone would see the truth. She'd been insufferable. She'd also been right. Ron arrived at 6 to escort her to the gala. He looked uncomfortable in formal robes, kept tugging at his collar like it was strangling him. 4 months of split schedules had left him perpetually exhausted. There were shadows under his eyes that no amount of sleep seemed to erase. "You look beautiful," he said, then caught her expression. "And absolutely terrifying. What's wrong?" Hermione handed him her speech, the real one, not Percy's version. Ron read it slowly, lips moving slightly. When he finished, he looked up with something like awe. "This is brilliant. Percy says it's career suicide." Percy would know. Ron set the parchment down. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know." She'd rewritten the speech 6 times since Percy left. Had a sanitized version prepared, full of platitudes and careful praise. Had the original version too, the one that said what she actually thought about the ministry's performance reform, had no idea which one she'd deliver until she was standing at the podium. "I'm a coward," Hermione said. Ron pulled her into a hug, careful not to wrinkle her robes. "You're not. You're just scared." "What's the difference?" "Cowards don't show up. You're going." He pulled back, hands on her shoulders. "Whatever you decide to say, it'll be the right thing, because you'll have decided it." "That's not how morality works, Ron." "No, but it's how choices work." He offered his arm. "Come on, let's go watch you terrify important people." The gala was exactly as insufferable as Hermione had imagined. The atrium had been transformed into something out of a storybook. All floating lights and conjured gardens and expensive champagne served by house elves in matching uniforms. Ministry officials clustered in groups, laughing too loud, performing happiness and unity for an audience of themselves. Hermione recognized half of them from the trials, not as defendants. These were the ones who'd been quietly complicit, who'd kept their heads down and followed orders and emerged from the war with their positions intact. The ones who'd never quite opposed Voldemort, but had never quite supported him either. The ones who are now celebrating their commitment to progressive values. "Miss Granger!" Kingsley appeared, resplendent in purple robes. "There you are. Come, there are people who want to meet you." The next hour was a blur of introductions. Hermione smiled and shook hands and made small talk with wizards who complimented her intelligence as if it were surprising. She drank champagne she didn't taste and laughed at jokes that weren't funny and felt herself disappearing into the performance. Ron stayed close, a quiet presence at her elbow. He didn't make small talk, didn't try to impress anyone, just stood there, solid and real, occasionally catching her eye in a way that said, "I know this is terrible, and I'm here anyway." At 8 o'clock, Kingsley called for attention. The room quieted, hundreds of faces turning toward the podium where Hermione would be expected to speak. Her heart hammered. Both speeches were in her pocket, the safe one and the true one. She had perhaps 30 seconds to decide which kind of person she wanted to be. Then she saw Winky. The house elf was serving champagne near the back of the room, moving between guests with the invisible efficiency her kind had perfected over centuries. No one looked at her. No one said thank you. She was furniture, a convenience, utterly beneath notice. Winky caught Hermione's eye. The house elf's expression was carefully neutral, but something passed between them. An understanding, maybe, or a challenge. You said you wanted to help us, that look said. So help. Hermione walked to the podium. Kingsley introduced her with warm praise, the youngest legislative assistant in a generation, a war hero, a brilliant mind dedicated to progress. The audience applauded politely. Hermione pulled both speeches from her pocket, looked at them, made her choice. Thank you, Minister, she began. It's an honor to be here, celebrating progress in creature rights and magical cooperation. She paused. The room waited. The Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures has made remarkable strides this year. We've reviewed 17 legislative proposals. We've formed 3 committees to study issues affecting part humans. We've drafted 6 memos outlining potential pathways to reform. Another pause. She could feel Ron watching her, tense and ready. We have done everything, Hermione continued, her voice steady, except change anything that matters. The room went very still. House elves still have no legal protections. Werewolves can still be denied employment and housing without recourse. Part humans accused of crimes still have no right to legal representation. Every proposal I've submitted to address these issues has been shelved, delayed, or lost in bureaucratic process. She saw Kingsley's face tighten, saw Percy close his eyes, saw the other officials exchange glances that ranged from shocked to furious, saw Winky standing very still, watching. I don't say this to criticize individual efforts, Hermione said. I say it because we are here celebrating progress we have not yet made, and if we congratulate ourselves for good intentions while doing nothing, we are complicit in the systems we claim to reform. The silence was absolute. So tonight, I propose something different. Not another committee, not another review. A simple law. Minimum wage protections for house elves to be implemented within 6 months. If we truly believe in progress, let us prove it with action, not speeches. She stepped back from the podium. No one applauded. Hermione folded both speeches, the one she'd given and the one she hadn't, and walked back to Ron. He took her arm without a word, and they left together through a room full of people who would absolutely make her pay for what she'd just done. Outside, in the cold December air, Ron finally spoke. Well, he said, that was spectacular. Hermione started laughing. It came out slightly hysterical, edged with terror and relief, and the awful certainty that she'd just destroyed her career. I'm going to be sacked, she said. Probably. I've accomplished nothing. You told the truth, in a room full of people who needed to hear it. Ron squeezed her hand. That's not nothing. They stood together in the darkness, and Hermione felt the weight of her choice settling over her, heavy and irrevocable, and somehow lighter than the alternative would have been. She'd chosen integrity over influence. Tomorrow, she'd learn what that cost. Tonight, she just held Ron's hand and breathed. Ron's wand hand was steady, which was good because the rest of him wanted to shake. They'd been crouched behind the hedgerow for 17 minutes, long enough for his knees to ache and his mind to catalogue every way this could go wrong. The cottage ahead looked harmless in the March twilight. Thatched roof, garden gnomes, smoke curling from the chimney like something out of a children's book. Intelligence said Antonin Dolohov's cousin lived there. Intelligence said she'd been sheltering Death Eater sympathizers, people who'd slipped through the cracks during the trials. Intelligence had been wrong before. Movement, northeast window. Harry's voice was barely a whisper, his body coiled with the particular tension that came before action. Next to him, Proudfoot and Savage, senior aurors, both of them, readied their wands with professional calm. Ron was neither senior nor calm. He was 8 months into training, which meant he got to crouch in hedgerows, while actual aurors made actual decisions. It meant he was supposed to follow orders. Weasley? Harry didn't look at him. When we breach, you hold the perimeter. Anyone tries to leave through the back, you stun first and identify after. Clear? Clear. It wasn't really. Nothing about oral work was clear. They'd been doing these raids for months now, sweeping up the remnants of Voldemort's network, the ones who'd escaped or hidden or claimed coercion. Some were genuinely dangerous. Some were just scared. Ron had gotten good at not thinking too hard about the difference. On my mark, Proudfoot said. 3, 2. The cottage door exploded outward. 3 figures burst through. 2 men and a woman, all running. Not toward the apparition point, which would have been smart. Toward the woods, which meant they were panicked or stupid, or knew something about the woods that the auras didn't. Take them! Harry was already moving, Savage on his heels. Ron ran for the perimeter position, wand up, tracking the runners. The woman peeled off toward the garden. 1 man followed Harry. The third, Ron's chest went cold. The third man was Thorfinn Roll. Not a cousin, not a sympathizer. An actual Death Eater who tortured Muggleborns in the Ministry's entrance hall during the war, who'd laughed while people screamed, who'd walked free because some solicitor had argued coercion and lack of evidence, and the Wizengamot had been too exhausted to fight every case. Roll saw Ron. Something flickered in his face. Recognition, maybe, or contempt. Well, Roll said, already backing toward the woods. If it isn't the Weasley boy, which one are you? Hard to keep track with so many of you. Ron's wand hand tightened. Don't bother answering, Roll continued, still retreating. Doesn't matter which one. You all bleed the same. The words were designed to provoke. Ron knew that. Roll wanted him angry, wanted him to make a mistake. It was working. Trumney, your knees, Ron said. His voice came out steady. Hands visible. Roll laughed. Or what? You'll tell your mother? She couldn't keep track of all her little blood traitors at Hogwarts. How many did she lose? I forget. 1. Fred. They'd lost Fred. Last warning, Ron said. Run along, boy. This is work for real wizards. Raoul turned and sprinted for the woods. Ron had 3 seconds to make a choice. The protocol was clear. Hold position. Call for backup. Don't pursue alone into unknown territory. These were the rules that kept auras alive, the lessons learned from decades of people dying because they'd been brave instead of smart. Harry's voice echoed from somewhere near the cottage. Perimeter holds. Wait for... Ron ran after Roll. The woods were dense, early. Ron crashed through underbrush, branches whipping his face. Ahead, he could hear Roll moving, heavy footfalls snapping wood. The man wasn't trying for stealth. He was leading Ron somewhere. The thought registered half a second too late. Ron broke into a clearing just as Roll spun, wand already moving. Confringo. Ron dove left. The spell hit a tree behind him, which exploded into splinters. He rolled, came up with his wand extended. Stupefy. Roll deflected it casually. That the best you've got? We were stunning blood traitors before you could hold a wand. They circled each other. Ron's training screamed at him. Assess the environment. Watch for accomplices. Don't let emotion compromise judgment. But under the training was something older and rawer. The fury of watching people like Raoul torture and murder and walk free. The rage of a war that should have ended months ago but kept finding new ways to continue. You're going back to Azkaban, Ron said. I was never in Azkaban. Insufficient evidence, remember? Your ministry's very committed to justice. Raoul's smile was vicious. Tell me, did the mudblood you're shagging enjoy watching her parents? Forget her. I heard about that. Creative bit of magic, erasing yourself from their memories. Must have hurt. The spell left Ron's wand before he'd consciously decided to cast it. Sectum Sempra. Raoul dodged, but not quite fast enough. The curse caught his shoulder, blood blooming dark against his robes. His expression shifted from contempt to something more dangerous. There it is, Raoul said quietly. There's the real you. He attacked in earnest then. 3 curses in rapid succession, vicious and practiced. Ron blocked 2, took the 3rd to his ribs. Pain exploded through his side. He staggered, managed a shield charm as Raoul pressed forward. This wasn't an arrest anymore. This was survival. They traded spells in the clearing's fading light. Ron's training held. Shield, dodge, counter, assess. But Raoul had decades of experience, had tortured and killed his way through 2 wars. He was faster than Ron, more creative with his curses, and he wasn't holding back. Diffindo. Raoul's curse caught Ron's left arm. Blood ran hot down to his wrist. Ron switched his wand to his right hand, barely parried the follow-up. His vision was starting to blur at the edges. He needed backup, needed to retreat, needed to stop Raoul before he disappeared again. The choice crystallized with perfect, terrible clarity. Ron could fall back, could return to the perimeter, report Raoul's location, let senior auras handle it. It was the smart move, the safe move, the one that followed every rule he'd been taught. Or he could end this now. Incarcerus. Ron conjured ropes, sent them whipping toward Raoul. The Death Eater burned them mid-air, returned fire with a curse Ron didn't recognize. It hit the ground near his feet, which cracked and began to steam. Ron jumped back, felt his ankle twist on uneven ground. He went down hard. Raoul was on him instantly, wand at Ron's throat. Pathetic. You really thought you could... Ron's fist caught him in the throat. It wasn't elegant. Wasn't magic. Was just a desperate punch thrown by someone who'd grown up with 6 siblings and knew how to fight dirty. Raoul choked, stumbled back, and Ron surged upward despite his ankle screaming protest. Stupefy. The spell hit Raoul square in the chest. He went down hard, unconscious before he hit the ground. Ron stood over him, breathing hard, bleeding from his arm and ribs and probably a dozen other places. His wand shook now, adrenaline finally catching up. He'd done it. He'd caught Raoul, had stopped a Death Eater from escaping justice, had violated direct orders to do it. Footsteps crashed through the underbrush. Harry burst into the clearing, wand up, Savage right behind him. They took in the scene, Ron bleeding and swaying, Raoul unconscious, the clearing torn up from spellfire. Harry's face went through several expressions very quickly. Relief, fury, something that might have been fear. I told you to hold the perimeter, Harry said quietly. He was getting away. I told you to hold the perimeter." Harry's voice was still quiet, which somehow made it worse than shouting. "You abandoned your position. You pursued alone into unsecured territory. You engaged without backup. It's Raoul, Thorfinn Raoul. He tortured—" "I know who he is." The shout finally came. "I know exactly who he is and what he did, and that's why you should have waited for backup instead of nearly getting yourself killed." Savage was binding Raoul with practiced efficiency, pointedly not looking at either of them. The other Aurors would hear about this. The whole department would hear about it. Ron had caught a Death Eater and destroyed his career in the same moment. "He was going to disappear," Ron said. His voice sounded distant, shock setting in. "Again, like all of them. And in 6 months we'd raid another cottage, and he'd be gone, and someone else would die, and we'd all pretend we didn't know it was coming." Harry's expression softened fractionally. "Ron, I'm tired of following rules that let them escape. The rules keep you alive. Fred followed rules." The words came out bitter. "Followed Percy into battle, because that's what you do when family needs you, and he's dead anyway." The clearing went silent. Harry closed his eyes. This isn't about Fred. Everything's about Fred. Ron swayed. The adrenaline was fading fast, leaving only pain and exhaustion. "He died fighting Death Eaters, and they walked free because we followed rules, and now I'm supposed to let another one escape because protocol says—" His ankle gave out. Harry caught him before he hit the ground, eased him down carefully. "Savage, get a healer, now." "I'm fine," Ron said. "You're bleeding from 4 places and you can't stand. You're not fine." Harry was checking Ron's injuries with gentle efficiency, the anger draining from his face. "You absolute idiot. What were you thinking? That someone needed to stop him? That's not your job. Not alone. Not like this." Harry met his eyes. "You could have died. But I didn't." "But you could have." Savage returned with a healer who immediately started casting diagnostic charms. Ron's ribs were cracked. His arm needed stitching. The ankle was sprained, possibly fractured. Nothing permanent, nothing fatal. Nothing that would matter when Robards heard what he'd done. They stabilized him enough to apparate back to headquarters. The healer wanted St. Mungo's, but protocol required debriefing first. Ron sat in an interview room while his wounds were properly tended, then gave his statement to a stone-faced aura from professional standards. He told the truth. Didn't try to justify it, didn't make excuses. He'd abandoned his post, pursued without authorization, engaged in unsanctioned combat. The regulations he'd violated stacked up like evidence at a trial. Raoul was in custody. That was something. It might not be enough. Harry sat with him afterward, both of them silent in the empty room. Outside, Ron could hear the department continuing, arrests processed, reports filed, the machinery of justice grinding forward. "Robards wants to see you tomorrow," Harry said finally. "Suspended pending review." Ron nodded. He'd expected that. "The review board will ask if you were impaired, emotionally compromised." "Was I?" Harry was quiet for a long moment. "Yeah, you were." "Does that make me wrong?" "It makes you human." Harry leaned back against the wall, looking as exhausted as Ron felt. "I get it, Ron. I get wanting to stop them all, wanting to make sure none of them escape. But you can't do this work angry. You'll get yourself killed, or worse. You'll become what you're fighting. I'm nothing like them. Not yet. But every aura who's gone dark started by deciding the rules didn't apply to them when they were serving justice. Harry met his eyes. I need you to hear this. What you did today was brave and stupid and effective and completely unacceptable. You caught Raoul. You also nearly died. Both things are true. Ron's ribs ached. His arm throbbed despite the healer's charms. His ankle was wrapped so tight he could barely feel his toes. He'd caught Raoul, had stopped a Death Eater from disappearing back into the shadows, had violated everything he'd been taught about discipline and protocol and working as part of a team. I'd do it again, Ron said quietly. Harry's face fell. Then you won't make it as an aura, and I'll lose another brother. The words hit harder than any curse. Harry stood, moved toward the door, stopped. Get some rest. We'll figure it out tomorrow. He left Ron alone in the interview room. Through the small window, Ron could see the night sky, the same sky he'd fought under at Hogwarts when the rules had been simpler. Survive, protect your friends, stop Voldemort. No protocols, no review boards, no questions about whether justice was worth dying for. He'd thought the war ending would make things clearer. He'd been wrong about that too. Ron closed his eyes and waited for tomorrow, when he'd learn what his choice had cost. The hospital wing smelled like antiseptic potions and failure. Hermione sat in the corridor outside Ron's room, staring at hands that wouldn't stop shaking. She'd been there for 3 hours, had apparated directly from the ministry the moment Harry's Patronus arrived, hadn't bothered with her cloak, had left half-finished legislation scattered across her desk. Ron's been injured. St. Mungo's, 4th floor. He's stable. Stable. The word was supposed to be comforting. It wasn't. Through the door, she could hear Healer Strout's low voice explaining something to Ron, hear the quiet murmur of his responses. They'd let Molly in first, then Harry. Now it was just Ron and the medical staff, and Hermione waiting in a corridor that felt like it was closing in around her. She should go in. She had every right to go in. She couldn't make herself move. Miss Granger. A trainee healer, young, nervous, approached with a clipboard. He's asking for you. Hermione stood on legs that felt disconnected from her body. The trainee pushed open the door, and she stepped into a private room that was too bright, too clean, too similar to every other hospital room she'd seen people die in. Ron was propped against pillows, his left arm wrapped in bandages, more bandages visible under his hospital gown. His face was pale but alert, and when he saw her, he tried to smile. "Hey," he said, "you didn't have to come." The casual tone, the attempt at normalcy, it broke something in her. "Don't." The word came out sharper than she'd intended. "Don't pretend this is fine." Ron's smile faded. "Hermione." 4 broken ribs, a fractured ulna, 2nd-degree burns across your shoulder, sprained ankle, mild concussion. She'd memorized the list from Healer Strout's report. That's what stable means, apparently. It sounds worse than it is. Does it? Because it sounds like you nearly died chasing a Death Eater alone into the woods against direct orders. Ron had the grace to look away. Harry told you. Harry told me you abandoned your position. Harry told me you violated protocol. Harry told me you're suspended pending review. Hermione moved closer to the bed, her voice dropping. What Harry didn't tell me was why you'd do something so catastrophically stupid. It was Raoul. I know who it was. That doesn't answer my question. Ron's jaw tightened. He was getting away. Again. like they all do, and I was tired of it. So you decided to get yourself killed instead? I decided to do something that mattered. The words hung between them, raw and honest. Hermione pulled over a chair, sat because her legs wouldn't hold her anymore. Ron, you matter. You being alive matters more than catching any Death Eater. Does it? Ron's voice was quiet now, dangerous. Because from where I'm sitting, all I do is split myself between a joke shop where my brother barely speaks, and aura training where I follow rules that let murderers walk free. I'm not changing anything. I'm not helping anyone. I'm just going through motions. That's not true. Isn't it? You're at the Ministry rewriting laws. Harry's leading raids. Even Percy's doing something important with international cooperation. And I'm, what, the bloke who shows up? Hermione stared at him. Is that what you think? That you don't matter unless you're a hero? I think I'm tired of being ordinary in a world that requires extraordinary just to keep up. The honesty of it hurt. Hermione recognized the feeling, had felt it herself every time her proposals were shelved, every time she sat through meetings where her opinions were noted and ignored, every time she wondered if leaving Hogwarts had been trading one kind of irrelevance for another. You're not ordinary, she said quietly. You've never been ordinary. I'm not special either, not like you and Harry. I'm just... Ron gestured vaguely at himself, at the hospital bed, at the evidence of his own recklessness. This, someone who makes mistakes. We all make mistakes. Not like mine. You agonize over every decision. Harry carries the weight of the world. I just charge ahead and deal with consequences after. His voice cracked slightly. Fred used to say I was brave, but brave people don't abandon their posts because someone insulted them. Brave people follow orders. Fred abandoned his post at Hogwarts to fight in the battle. Fred died. The words fell like stones. Hermione reached for his hand, the right one, unbandaged. His fingers were cold. Ron, this isn't about Fred. Everything's about Fred. Ron's eyes were too bright. He died, and I lived, and I don't know what I'm supposed to do with that except try to matter enough to justify it. You don't have to justify being alive. Don't I? George can barely function. Mum cries every time she sets the table. Dad works late because coming home means seeing the empty chair. And I'm just here, trying to do something that proves Fred's death wasn't for nothing. And I can't even do that right. Hermione felt tears on her face and didn't remember starting to cry. You being alive isn't nothing. You being here with George, supporting your family, training to protect people, that's not nothing. It feels like nothing. Well, it's not. She gripped his hand tighter. And nearly getting yourself killed doesn't make it mean more. It just means I'd lose you too. Ron looked at her properly then, seemed to actually see her for the first time since she'd entered the room. Hermione. I've been working 70-hour weeks, she said. Since the gala, since I ruined my career with that speech. I took on 3 additional legislative reviews, volunteered for weekend research, stayed late every single night. I know, I barely see you. Because if I stop, I'll have to think about what I said and what it cost and whether it was worth it. And I don't, her voice broke. I don't know if I can face that answer. Ron was silent, thumb moving gentle circles on the back of her hand. So I work, Hermione continued. I tell myself I'm being productive, that I'm fighting for something important. And I am. I think I am, but I'm also running. From you, from us, from everything that isn't about fixing broken systems, because fixing broken systems feels controllable, and being in love with you while you risk your life feels... She stopped. Couldn't finish. Terrifying, Ron offered quietly. Yes. They sat in silence. Somewhere down the corridor, a healer was explaining discharge procedures to another patient. A trolley rattled past. St. Mungo's continued its work of healing people who kept finding new ways to break. I'm sorry, Ron said finally, for scaring you. For everything. Are you sorry for going after Roll? He considered the question seriously. No, just for doing it alone. At least he was honest. The review board meets next week, Hermione said. What will you tell them? The truth. That I violated protocol, that I let anger compromise my judgment, that I'd probably do it again in the same situation. Ron's smile was bitter. I'll be expelled from the program. Robards made that clear. And the shop? George needs me. That hasn't changed. He shifted against the pillows, winced. Maybe it's better this way. I was terrible at splitting time anyway. At least now I can focus on one thing. Is that what you want? Does it matter what I want? Of course it matters. Ron looked at her, really looked, the way he did sometimes that made her feel transparent and seen and utterly known. Then I want you to stop working yourself into exhaustion, trying to prove something to people who'll never appreciate it. I want you to take the leave of absence the ministry offered after the gala and actually rest for once. Hermione had turned down that offer immediately. 3 weeks of administrative leave, presented as a kindness, but really a punishment, a way to remove her from important discussions while everything settled. I can't just stop, she said. Why not? Because if I stop, someone else will take my place and they won't care about house elves or werewolves or any of it. At least if I'm there, even if I'm failing, I'm trying. And how's that working out? The question was gentle, but it still stung. I don't know, Hermione admitted. Some days I think I'm making a difference. Most days I think I'm just making myself feel better about being complicit. Then take the leave, Ron said. 3 weeks. Rest. Figure out what you actually want versus what you think you should want. I can't. There's a committee meeting next Tuesday about werewolf registration requirements, and if I'm not there, the meeting will happen without you. The world will keep turning, and you'll still be exhausted and angry and running from everything that scares you. I'm not running. Hermione. Ron squeezed her hand. You're in St. Mungo's, and you've been here for 3 hours, and you waited in the corridor for 2.5 of them because you were afraid to come in and see me hurt. The observation landed like a physical blow. I'm not good at this, Hermione whispered. I can research dark magic and brew polyjuice potion and rewrite legislation, but I don't know how to just be here when someone I love is hurting and I can't fix it. You're here now. That's enough. Is it? Yeah. Ron pulled her hand up, pressed a kiss to her knuckles. It really is. Hermione wanted to believe him, wanted to accept that presence without purpose could be valuable, that she didn't have to earn the right to rest or grieve or be afraid, wanted to stop running long enough to figure out what she was running from. If I take the leave, she said slowly, you have to promise me something. What? That you'll actually talk to the review board, not about protocol violations, about why you did it, about Fred, about feeling like you don't matter, about all the things you just told me." Ron's expression shuttered. "That's not... They don't want to hear that. They need to hear it, because you're not the only aura dealing with this. You're just the only one honest enough to admit it." Hermione held his gaze. "And because if you're going to be expelled anyway, you might as well make them understand what they're doing to people. That won't change the outcome. Maybe not, but it might change something." Ron was quiet for a long moment, considering. Outside the window, evening was settling over London, ordinary people going about ordinary lives, unaware that in a hospital room 2 floors above, 2 people were trying to figure out how to be alive after surviving. "Okay," Ron said finally. "I'll talk to them. Really talk." "Okay," Hermione echoed. "I'll take the leave." It felt like surrender and relief in equal measure. Molly appeared in the doorway 20 minutes later, her face drawn with worry that had been living there since May. "Hermione, dear, you should go home. Get some rest. I'm staying with Ron tonight." "I can stay," Hermione said. "You have work tomorrow." "Actually," Hermione said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded, "I'm taking a leave of absence, starting tonight." Molly's expression flickered through several emotions: surprise, concern, something that might have been approval. "That's probably wise, dear." Ron caught Hermione's eye, smiled slightly. "Progress," that smile said. "Small, but real." Hermione stood, leaned down to kiss Ron's forehead. "I'll come back tomorrow. I'll be here. Healer says 2 more days minimum." "Good." She squeezed his hand one more time. "Don't do anything heroic while I'm gone." "Wouldn't dream of it." She left him with his mother, apparated back to her flat in London. It was small, temporary, furnished with cast-offs from the borough, and books she'd been meaning to organize for months. She hadn't really lived here, had just slept between work shifts, changed clothes, apparated out again. Now she stood in the middle of her own space and had absolutely no idea what to do with it. 3 weeks, no committee meetings, no legislative reviews, no filing or research or fighting battles she was slowly losing. Just time. The concept felt foreign and terrifying. Hermione made tea she didn't drink, ran a bath she didn't take, tried to read 3 different books before giving up on all of them. Her mind kept circling back to Ron in that hospital bed, to the exhaustion in his voice when he'd said, "I'm just going through motions," to the recognition that she'd been doing exactly the same thing. They'd survived a war, they'd defeated Voldemort, they'd won. And now, they were both drowning in peace. She pulled out parchment, started writing without quite knowing what she was writing. Not legislation, not research notes, just thoughts, raw and unfiltered. "I don't know how to do this. How to be a person instead of a cause. How to want things that aren't about fixing everything broken. How to accept that I might fail at changing the world. And that might be okay, because at least I tried." Ron nearly died today, and my first thought wasn't grief or fear. It was that I'd been too busy to see this coming, too focused on work to notice he was struggling, too committed to my own mission to be present for his. What kind of person does that make me? She stopped writing, stared at the words. The answer, she realized, was simple. It made her human, flawed and frightened, and doing her best in circumstances that required more than anyone should have to give. Just like Ron, just like everyone who'd survived and was now trying to figure out what came after. Hermione folded the parchment, tucked it away, Tomorrow she'd go back to St. Mungo's, would sit with Ron and not try to fix anything, just be there, would learn how to be present instead of productive, would start figuring out how to live instead of just survive. It wouldn't be easy. Nothing about peace had been easy, but maybe, finally, it would be honest. She went to bed early, slept fitfully, and woke to pale morning light with the strange, fragile sense that something had shifted. Not fixed. Nothing was fixed, but shifted enough to see differently. Hermione got dressed, gathered flowers from the small shop on the corner, and went back to the hospital. Ron was awake when she arrived, arguing mildly with Healer Stroud about discharge timing. He looked better, less pale, more present. He looked, Hermione realized, like himself. "Hey," he said when he saw her. "You came back." "Of course I came back." Even without a committee meeting to rush off to. Hermione set the flowers on his bedside table, pulled the chair close. Even then, she took his hand, and for the first time in months, she stayed. The fight started over breakfast dishes. Ron had been home from St. Mungo's for 2 weeks, cleared medically, suspended professionally, existing in the strange limbo of someone whose future was being decided by people he'd never meet. The review board had his statement. They had Harry's report. They had 14 pages of protocol violations and 1 captured Death Eater. And somewhere in that equation was a decision about who Ron Weasley would be allowed to become. He'd been living at the Burrow, sleeping in his childhood bedroom, helping George in the mornings, because that, at least, hadn't changed. Hermione had taken her leave of absence and spent most of it at St. Mungo's, then at the Ministry Library researching house elf legislation that might never see implementation, then back at her flat where she wasn't sleeping properly. They'd been circling each other for days, careful conversations, gentle questions, both of them pretending everything was fine. It couldn't last. "You left these in the sink," Hermione said. Her voice was level, controlled. She was holding a teacup and saucer Ron had used that morning, 3 hours ago. "I was going to wash them," Ron said. "When?" "When I got back from the shop. You've been back for 20 minutes. Ron looked up from the Daily Prophet. He hadn't really been reading. Hermione stood in the Burrow's kitchen doorway, still in her work robes, even though her leave had ended yesterday, holding his breakfast dishes like they were evidence at trial. "It's a cup, Hermione." "It's not about the cup." "Then what's it about?" She set the dishes down with precise care. "It's about the fact that you've been home for 2 weeks and you haven't washed a single dish or put away your clothes or done anything except mope around the Burrow, waiting for the review board to decide your future." "I'm not moping." "You're absolutely moping." Ron stood, the chair scraping harsh against flagstone. "Sorry if I'm not cheerful about being expelled from aura training for doing the right thing." "The right thing?" Hermione's voice rose slightly. "You nearly died, Ron. You violated orders. You fought alone. I caught Roll, a Death Eater who tortured Muggleborns while you and your parents." He stopped himself, but too late. Hermione's face went white. "While what? While I erased my parents' memories. Is that what you were going to say?" "No, because I did that to protect them. I made an impossible choice to keep them safe, and I still haven't worked up the courage to reverse it because I'm terrified they'll hate me for what I did." Her hands were shaking now. "So don't you dare use that against me because you're feeling sorry for yourself." I'm not feeling sorry for myself. Then what are you doing? Because from where I'm standing, you're hiding at the burrow, avoiding conversations, letting George carry the shop while you pretend everything's fine. George doesn't want help. He wants to work in silence because talking hurts too much, and I'm respecting that instead of forcing cheerful conversation like Mum does. That's not respect, that's avoidance. Hermione moved closer, and there was something dangerous in her expression now. You're avoiding the shop, avoiding your future, avoiding me. I'm not avoiding you. Really? When's the last time we had an actual conversation? One that wasn't about my work, or your injuries, or careful small talk designed to avoid anything that matters. Ron wanted to argue. Couldn't. Because she was right. They'd been performatively fine for weeks. Both of them too afraid to say what they were actually thinking. What do you want me to say? Ron asked. That I'm scared the review board will expel me, that I don't know what I'll do if they do, that I'm 20 years old and I've already failed at the one thing I thought I could actually be good at. Yes, I want you to say that instead of pretending it doesn't matter. And then what? You'll fix it? Write me a legislative proposal for how to not be a failure? The words came out cruel. Ron saw them land, saw Hermione flinch. That's not fair, she said, quietly. None of this is fair. You got to quit Hogwarts and chase your dreams at the Ministry. I got suspended for catching a Death Eater. Where's the fairness in that? I didn't quit. I made a choice. And it's been a disaster, in case you haven't noticed. Has it? Because you're still there, still fighting for your causes, still mattering. Mattering. Hermione laughed, sharp and bitter. I gave a speech that destroyed my credibility. I spent 3 weeks on leave because I was too much of a coward to face what I'd done. I went back yesterday and spent 8 hours filing paperwork because that's all they trust me with now. I don't matter, Ron. I'm just stubborn. At least you're there. At least you're doing something. And what are you doing? Feeling sorry for yourself? Waiting for someone else to decide your future? What else can I do? The decision's made. I'm just waiting for them to tell me officially that I'm not good enough. You are good enough. Hermione's voice cracked. You've always been good enough, but you can't see it because you're so desperate to be Harry or Fred or anyone except yourself. The kitchen went silent. Ron felt something break open in his chest. Rage or grief or the truth he'd been avoiding for months. Fred's dead, he said. Each word felt like pulling glass from a wound. He died being brave and loyal and everything a Weasley is supposed to be. And I'm here, alive, and I don't know why. I don't know what I did to deserve surviving when he didn't. You didn't do anything. It's not about deserving. Then what's it about? Random chance? Bad luck? The universe deciding Fred mattered less than me? Ron's voice was rising now, months of suppressed grief finally surfacing. Because I can't accept that. I can't just live my life like his death doesn't mean anything. So you'll get yourself killed trying to prove you're worthy of being alive? That's your plan? Better than hiding behind paperwork because you're afraid to fail. Hermione slapped him. Not hard. She wasn't trying to hurt him. But the shock of it stopped them both cold. Don't, she said, tears streaming down her face now. Don't you dare accuse me of hiding when you're doing the exact same thing. We're both terrified, Ron. We both think we're not good enough. The only difference is I'm trying to change things while you're trying to die for them. That's not. It is. You went after Roll because some part of you thinks being a hero means being dead. Because Fred died and Harry almost died, and everyone you love keeps risking everything, and you think that's what bravery looks like. She wiped her face with shaking hands. But it's not. Bravery is living. It's getting up every day and trying to be better, even when you feel like you're failing. It's choosing to stay instead of running away or running toward death or running at all. Ron sank back into his chair. The fight had drained out of him, leaving only exhaustion. I don't know how to do that, he said quietly. Neither do I. They sat in silence. Through the kitchen window, Ron could see the garden, overgrown and wild, nobody having the energy to tend it properly. The bench where he and Hermione had sat the morning she decided to take the ministry job. The pond where they'd practiced Patronuses a lifetime ago. Everything looked the same. Everything was different. I'm afraid, Ron said finally. All the time. Afraid I'll fail at the shop, fail at being an aura if they somehow let me continue, fail at being someone you can love without being disappointed. I'm not disappointed in you. You should be. I'm disappointing. Ron, no, let me. He took a breath. When Harry got his aura acceptance, I was relieved. Finally, something I could do that mattered. A way to prove I wasn't just the sidekick, the comic relief, the one who was there because Harry needed someone. And I couldn't even do that right. I went after Roll because I wanted to matter, and all I did was prove that I'm still just reacting instead of thinking. Hermione moved to sit across from him. Her eyes were red but steady. You matter to George, she said. You showing up every morning, even when he can barely speak, that matters. It's not glamorous or heroic, but it's keeping him alive. Is it? He's a ghost, Hermione. I'm not helping him, I'm just there. Being there is helping. Maybe not in ways you can measure, but you don't know what would happen if you stopped. She reached across the table, and after a moment, Ron took her hand. I'm terrified too. Every single day. I go to the ministry, and I file paperwork, and I attend meetings where people pretend to listen, and I wonder what I'm doing. If I made the right choice, if I'm changing anything, or just making myself feel important while the system stays exactly the same. You are changing things, Ron said. Am I? Name one law I've actually changed. One real, concrete improvement. Ron opened his mouth, closed it. He couldn't name one, because she hadn't changed any laws yet, had just fought and proposed and been quietly shut down at every turn. See? Hermione's smile was heartbreaking. I'm failing too. I'm just failing in professional robes with official letterhead. So what do we do? I don't know. She gripped his hand tighter. But I know what we can't do. We can't keep running from each other. Can't keep pretending we're fine when we're both drowning. Can't keep measuring ourselves against people we'll never be. I don't know how to stop. Neither do I. But maybe we figure it out together. Ron looked at their joined hands, hers ink-stained, his scarred from the shop and training and a war that should have ended everything, but had just made everything harder. I took the raid personally, he admitted. Roll said things about you, about your parents, and I wanted to hurt him. Not because it was justice, because it was revenge. I know. You know. Ron, I've known you for 8 years. I know when you're being noble and when you're being angry." She paused. "The speech at the gala. I told myself it was about principles, about standing up for what's right. But really, I was tired of being dismissed, tired of being the smart girl who gets patted on the head and ignored. I wanted to make them uncomfortable, and I did, and it accomplished nothing except satisfying my ego. It accomplished something. You told the truth. In the worst possible way, at the worst possible time, burning bridges I might have used to actually help people." Hermione's voice was soft. "We both keep choosing dramatic gestures over sustainable change. Keep trying to be heroes instead of just being ourselves." The observation sat between them, uncomfortable and true. "If I'm expelled," Ron said slowly, "I'll work at the shop full time. Try to help George heal, or at least not break worse. It's not glamorous, but it's enough," Hermione finished. "It's more than enough." "And you, what will you do?" "Keep filing paperwork, keep attending meetings, keep pushing slowly for changes that might happen in 5 years or 10 or never." She met his eyes and tried to remember that slow progress is still progress, even when it feels like failure. That sounds exhausting. It is. "We're a mess," Ron said. "Completely. Despite everything, the fight, the tears, the brutal honesty, Ron felt something loosen in his chest. Not hope exactly, but something lighter than the weight he'd been carrying. "I love you," he said, "even when you're right about me being an idiot. I love you too, even when you leave dishes in the sink." It wasn't forgiveness. They'd both said things that would sting for days. It wasn't resolution. Nothing was fixed. Nothing was solved. But it was honest. They sat together in the Burrows' kitchen as afternoon light slanted through windows, holding hands across a table littered with breakfast dishes and yesterday's profit, and all the small evidence of lives that continued despite everything. Outside, they could hear George in the garden, the first time he'd been out there in weeks, not tending it, just sitting on the bench, being still. Ron squeezed Hermione's hand. She squeezed back. Tomorrow, the review board would deliver their decision. Tomorrow, Hermione would go back to filing paperwork and fighting battles she was slowly losing. Tomorrow, they'd both wake up and try again to be people instead of heroes. Today, they just sat together. It wasn't comfort, it wasn't triumph, but it was real, and they were both still here, and that had to count for something. The owl arrived on a Tuesday morning in August, carrying 2 things: Ron's official reinstatement to the Aura program with a formal reprimand, and Hermione's promotion offer. They opened the letters at the same table where they'd fought 3 months ago. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Conditional reinstatement, Ron read aloud. Probationary. Status for 12 months. Additional oversight. Mandatory counseling sessions. He looked up. They're giving me another chance. Hermione should have felt relieved, should have congratulated him. Instead, she stared at her own letter. Ministry letterhead. Kingsley's personal seal. An offer she'd stopped believing would ever come. Department head. Regulation and control of magical creatures. Youngest appointee in a century. Immediate appointment. Hermione? Ron set down his letter. What is it? She handed him the parchment wordlessly. Ron read it twice, his expression shifting through surprise, pride, something more complicated. This is incredible. This is everything you wanted. Was it? Hermione thought about the past 3 months. The leave of absence that had forced her to stop running, the return to work, filing paperwork, and attending meetings where her opinions were noted and ignored. The slow, grinding progress of changing one small regulation about house elf working conditions. Not wages, not freedom, just a requirement for monthly health inspections. It had taken 8 weeks to push through that single change. 8 weeks of negotiations and compromises and explaining the same arguments to people who pretended not to understand. It was the smallest possible victory. It had felt like everything. "There's a condition," Hermione said, pointing to the 3rd paragraph. "I'd need to start immediately. Full-time commitment. The position requires—" She couldn't quite finish. Ron found the line himself. "Requires cancelling any scheduled leave for the next 6 months to ensure smooth transition." The words sat between them. Hermione and Ron had planned a holiday. Not elaborate, just a week at a cottage by the sea, the one Bill and Fleur had recommended. They'd booked it 2 months ago, right after the fight, when they'd both realized they needed to learn how to be together without crisis forcing them close. The holiday started in 5 days. "You should take it," Ron said. Ron, "No, seriously, department head. You could actually change things from that position, real changes, not just incremental adjustments." "I know. So take it." Hermione looked at him properly. 3 months ago, he would have said this while not meeting her eyes, would have meant it while resenting it, would have supported her while feeling abandoned. Now he met her gaze steadily, and she could see the complexity there. Genuine pride mixed with disappointment, hope mixed with the knowledge that this would cost them something. "What do you want me to do?" she asked. "I want you to choose what makes you happy, not what makes you important." The distinction landed like a revelation. Hermione had spent months, years really, chasing importance. Top grades, SPEW, the ministry position, the gala speech, the endless proposals. She'd measured her worth in achievements and changes, and the belief that she had to matter to justify existing. But the past 3 months, the quiet months of filing paperwork and small victories and sitting with Ron in hospital rooms and gardens, those hadn't made her important. They'd made her happy. "I don't know if I can be happy," Hermione admitted. "I don't know how to want small things when there's so much that needs fixing." "The world will still need fixing next week, next month, next year." Ron reached across the table, took her hand. "But we only get one now." Hermione thought about the house elf health inspection regulation. 8 weeks of work for one small change. If she became department head, she could push through dozens of changes, could rewrite policy from the top, could actually make the difference she'd always wanted, could spend the next 5 years, 10 years, 20, fighting battles that never quite ended, measuring her life in memos and committee votes and incremental progress that always felt like it wasn't enough. She thought about the cottage by the sea, about walking on a beach with Ron without talking about the war or work or what came next, about being ordinary and small and utterly unimportant for 7 days, about choosing presence over achievement. "If I turn this down," Hermione said slowly, "someone else will take the position. Someone who might not care about house elves or werewolves. Yeah, someone who'll probably maintain the status quo. Probably. And I'll still be a junior legislative assistant, filing paperwork, pushing for changes that take months to implement. Yeah," Ron squeezed her hand. "You'll also be at the beach with me in 5 days." Hermione closed her eyes, saw both futures with perfect clarity. Take the promotion, power, influence, the ability to change systems from within. Long hours, endless meetings, important work that would consume everything. The chance to matter in ways she'd always believed she should matter. Decline the promotion. Small victories, slow progress, continued frustration with bureaucracy, but also time, space, the possibility of building a life instead of a legacy. McGonagall wrote to me last week, Hermione said. Did I tell you? No. She said the war is over, and now we choose what comes next. Hermione opened her eyes. I thought she meant we choose what kind of world to build, but maybe she meant we choose what kind of people to be. Ron was quiet, letting her work through it. Hermione thought about the girl who'd started SPW in 4th year. Righteous and exhausting and absolutely certain that changing the world was the only thing worth doing. That girl had been insufferable. That girl had also been 14. Hermione was 20 now. She'd fought a war, erased her parents' memories, helped destroy Horcruxes and Death Eaters and Voldemort himself. She'd proven she could be important, could be extraordinary, could matter. Maybe it was time to prove she could be happy. I'm going to decline, she said. Ron's face went through several expressions: surprise, concern, cautious hope. Are you sure? No, but I'm choosing anyway. She wrote 3 letters that afternoon. The first, to Kingsley, was brief. Dear Minister, I am deeply honoured by the offer of department head. However, I must respectfully decline. I believe I can be more effective continuing my current work on specific legislative reforms, rather than managing broader departmental operations. Thank you for your continued faith in my abilities. Hermione Granger. It was professional, diplomatic, and completely untrue. The real reason was that she was tired of sacrificing everything for work that might never be enough. But she couldn't write that to the Minister for Magic. The second letter, to McGonagall, was more honest. Dear Professor McGonagall, you told me the war is over, and now we choose what comes next. I'm choosing to build a life, not just a career. I'm choosing to be present, not just productive. I'm choosing the beach. Thank you for teaching me that. Bravery comes in many forms. Hermione. The third letter, she didn't send, just kept it, folded in her pocket. Dear Mum and Dad, when I restore your who fights for what's right but doesn't sacrifice everything in the process, I hope you'll be proud. I hope you'll forgive me. I'm trying to forgive myself. Love, Hermione. They left for the cottage 5 days later on a Wednesday morning in August. George had insisted, take the whole week. The shop won't burn down. Probably. And Ron had packed their bags with careful efficiency, like someone who'd spent months learning how to be organized in small ways. The cottage was exactly as Bill had described. Small, weathered, perched on a cliff overlooking the sea. No flue connection, no owl post, no ministry communications. Just waves and wind and the kind of quiet that felt foreign after a year of noise. Hermione stood on the beach that first evening, watching the sun set over water that stretched endless and unconcerned with human affairs. Ron appeared beside her, hands in his pockets, comfortable in silence. No regrets? He asked. Thousands, Hermione admitted, but none about being here. They walked along the shore. The sand was cool under Hermione's bare feet, the water cold when it touched her ankles. Ron found a shell, smooth, grey, unremarkable, and pocketed it without ceremony. What will you do? Hermione asked. When we go back, with the probation and the counseling and all of it, try to be better at following orders. Try to understand why protocol matters even when it feels wrong. Ron paused. Try to forgive myself for being alive when Fred isn't. That's not your fault. I know. Knowing doesn't make it easier. They walked further, leaving footprints the tide would erase. What about you? Ron asked. What happens when you go back to being a junior legislative assistant instead of department head? I keep pushing, keep fighting, keep celebrating victories that take 8 weeks and change almost nothing. Hermione smiled slightly. Keep remembering that small progress is still progress. That sounds exhausting. It is, but it's also... She stopped, searching for the word. Sustainable. I can do that work and still have time for this, for us, for being human instead of just being right. Ron took her hand. They stood together as the sun disappeared below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold and violet. Somewhere behind them, the cottage waited with its simple furniture and cold fireplace, and 7 days of nothing they had to do. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the ministry continued its work. Laws were debated, committees met. House elves served and suffered and went unnoticed. The world continued needing fixing. It would still need fixing next week. I love you, Hermione said. Not dramatically, not as declaration, just as fact. I love you too, Ron said, even though we're both disasters. Especially because we're both disasters. They turned back toward the cottage as darkness fell. Ron's shell was still in his pocket, a small, ordinary thing he'd chosen to keep for no reason, except that he'd wanted to. Hermione thought about choices and consequences, about paths taken and abandoned, about building a life instead of a legacy. Thought about being 20 years old after surviving a war, trying to figure out how to be alive instead of just not dead. It wasn't triumph, wasn't resolution, wasn't any kind of ending at all. It was just a choice to stop running, to build something small and fragile and entirely their own. Tomorrow, they'd wake up in the cottage, would make breakfast, walk on the beach, maybe read or sleep or just sit in comfortable silence, would do 7 days of nothing important, nothing productive, nothing that mattered to anyone except them, would prove that being ordinary was enough, would choose again and again to stay. Tonight, they walked back to the cottage hand in hand. The war was over. The world waited. And for 7 days, they would let it wait.